Mover Nation, live from Santa Monica, California. It is the show that has made the resolution to never, ever Airbnb my vehicle. And also today, in continuing with my own LA story, I have this very real fascination with LA noir. When I first came to town, LA Confidential was one of my favorite films of all time. So I'm going to have on a series of guests, and the first of those episodes is today. I have Jacy Nova and Pat Tapia. They are part of Case Files' new podcast, Dragonfly, which is about the murder of Brett Cantor, which happened on July 30th in 1993. So we are coming up on the 30-year anniversary. They're going to talk about this and the cold case and the work that they've done on this podcast. And anyways, live from Santa Monica, California, I'm your host, Collier Landry. This is Moving Past Trauma Live. Mover Nation, let's get into it.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in...
When I was 12 years old, my testimony sent my father to prison for murdering my mother. This podcast serves as a type of therapy and reconciliation for myself, and it is my hope that it helps anyone who has experienced deception, betrayal, and dark trauma. I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Trauma.
Mover Nation, what's going on? Happy Wednesday. What is it? The 27th? Wednesday, July 27th? No, July 26th. I don't even know what day it is. I better know this because my friends are getting married on Saturday, so I better be there. Welcome again. As I have said, this is a kind of a cool new series that I'm doing about some cool LA noir true crime stories. I'm gonna also have soon Laura Richards, who does who hosts her own podcast, but she talks a lot about the Menendez brothers. They're going to be on at a later date. Not the Menendez brothers. She's going to be on, rather. But to start off and to kick this off, I have two wonderful hosts from this new Case File podcast, Jacy Nova and Pat Tapia. This new podcast is called Dragonfly. Now, I'm going to play a little intro video just so you guys kind of get the gist of what the podcast is about, and then we're going to get into it and the work that they did over the last 3 years to bring this podcast to the masses. So please check out, here we are, we're going to load up their trailer and check it out.
Step inside the shadowy world of the 90s music industry with Case File Presents. We take you behind the velvet ropes to explore the dark side of the Hollywood club scene and the nightlife king and queen pins who ruled it. A world where secrets trade hands like currency. Among one of the most compelling mysteries is who murdered Brett Cantor. Brett Cantor was a rising star in the music industry in 1992 as an A&R executive at Chrysalis Music and for discovering bands like Rage Against the Machine. By the age of 25, Brett's life was hitting all the right notes. He was the top promoter in Hollywood, a partner in the infamous nightclub Dragonfly, and was dating actress Rose McGowan. But as fate would have it, unexpected events led Brett down a dangerous path. On July 30th, 1993, Brett's life in the fast lane took a tragic turn when he was found murdered in his West Hollywood apartment. His case remains unsolved to this day. Join us as we reveal the findings of our 3-year cold case investigation into Brett Cantor's final days, murder, and the haunting aftermath documented by his family and friends.
The last time I saw Brett alive, it was weird. He cut all his hair off, and he changed his look, and he acted different. He knew something was up.
So, that is a little bit of a sneak preview of their new podcast. I am pleased to welcome to the program Jacy Nova and Detective Pat Tapia. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm excellent, man. Thank you so much. Welcome to Moving Past Trauma Live. It's so great to have you guys.
It's good to be here.
And Jacy reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you want to talk to Pat and myself about what we're doing." And so I'm really stoked to have you guys on the program. So Why don't you guys tell me a little bit? We just played a little bit of the trailer. Why don't you guys tell me a little bit about how all this came about?
Do you want to go first, Pat?
No, you go ahead. You're the one who started this, and I'm along to help you.
Okay. I moved back from San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2019, and I wanted to do a cold case investigation of Brett's murder. And I had known Brett back in 1993. We had met through a restaurant I had worked at while I was in college. And so obviously doing a cold case investigation, it's very challenging to know where to start, what police officers to speak to. And so by chance, I moved into this apartment in Long Beach and I met Pat Tapia. He moved in next door to me. And I told him about Brett's murder and asked him if somehow he could help me. And so he got in touch with Detective Rick Jackson, which was the original homicide detective in the case. And I reconnected with Brett's brother, Mark, and all my old friends from back then and said, hey, do we want to do this? And so as we started investigating the case, we realized that there was a lot of information withheld back in 1993 because a lot of people were scared when Brett was murdered. We also uncovered new information in the case, and Pat Tapia came on board. He's a retired homicide detective with the LA County Sheriff's Department for 38 years. And he also invited Paul Delhauer, a criminal profiler, to join the case. And that's how it all started. And we've been working on it for almost 4 years now.
Well, that is there you go, and you got like how serendipitous that Pat ends up being your neighbor.
Yeah, quite coincidence.
So, Pat, what did you think about when Jacy approached you about this?
Well, first, I was interested in the case and interested in what had happened. And after contacting LAPD and talking with Rick Jackson, Jacy asked me if I'd be interested in doing a podcast. And like, yeah, what's a podcast? And she had told me that she had been doing some podcasts already, and I've kind of heard of them, but I did not know what they were because I thought they were just audio. But then I'm learning that all these podcasts are on video. So I don't know what you call that. Anyways, started looking into the case, and it was amazing, all the different nuances with Brett's case and all of the different information that LAPD had received back in 93 when this happened. And they talked to a lot of people, but we found out that there was a lot of people they did not talk to only because they did not know about certain people. And in my experience, you ask questions of people when you're doing an investigation, and they'll answer your questions the most vague way they can, but they usually won't volunteer stuff because they don't want to be part of the investigation. They don't want to have to go to court. They don't want to be possibly retaliated on. But after so many years, it was actually about, I guess, maybe 27 when we started looking into this, more people started talking about it. And when the first part aired, we got more information, which led to this second phase of the podcast. And we're hoping that people will come forward and give us information, or give it to Crime Stoppers, or give it to LAPD, so that hopefully we could bring some closure for Brett's family, his mom and his brother, and also friends of Brett's, and also just to solve the mystery of what happened.
And so, Pat, so you worked for the sheriff's department?
Yes, Los Angeles County Sheriff's.
And so were cold cases something that you were particularly covering, like you were particularly interested in?
I had worked a couple of years on a task force where we investigated cold cases, and they were quite extensive, and a lot of ground that you had to cover from back when it started. So I had experience in working cold cases, and there's nothing more to working cold cases than there is working a fresh case. You just follow the leads that you can. So I've always been most of my career, I was a detective. And so I was very interested in this and thought I would be able to help out.
And Jacy, so how did you guys begin to structure this whole project, and how did obviously, so he's your neighbor, and then it just kind of unfolds as podcasts normally do, or?
Well, I think part of it is like Brett's murder, obviously back in 1993, when you're young and you're in college, or like anytime someone that you, or whether you're friends with or it's a family member, dies under tragic circumstances, it kind of leaves an imprint on your heart. That moment stays with you forever. And to all of us, Brett was 25 when he was killed. And it was very shocking because he was a co-owner of the nightclub Dragonfly. He was an A&R rep for Chrysalis Music. He was instrumental in discovering the band Rage Against the Machine. Super friendly, just fun, nice guy. And for him to all of a sudden be murdered after he came home from a club one night and like no one knowing what happened, it was quite shocking, and it just kind of stayed with me. And as I got into producing true crime podcasts, I have another podcast called Death by Misadventure, which is more paranormal. I always thought about Brett's case, and I really didn't want to do any podcast on Brett's case unless I felt like I could do it justice. And that's when I reconnected with his brother, Mark, asked his permission if he would be okay with it, talked with friends. And then I just felt like when Pat moved in next door to me, I felt like it was confirmation from the other side, Brett saying, yeah, here he is. He's going to help you, like, look into my case. And things just started falling into place. And we just kept receiving more and more information about what happened to Brett. We identified key people that had never been interviewed. We also identified other possible high-profile crimes at that time that could be connected to Brett's case. And it just kind of came all together. But it's definitely been a roller coaster ride. And I'm just so grateful to be able to work with Pat and Paul on the case. And I know for Brett's mom, Ronnie, who's 83 years old now, it's the 30-year anniversary of Brett's murder on Sunday. And so I saw her for dinner last week, and she just hugged me and said, thank you for caring about my son. And yeah, I mean, for any cold case, any story deserves to be told. And we're just so thankful that so many people have been supporting the case, including yourself. We really appreciate it.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I appreciate it for sure.
well, happy to put the word out there, and especially, as a, victim advocate, I guess you could say, um, closure is really a unique thing to be able to have in these sort of circumstances, and anything that sort of pushes the family towards that in any sort of way, other than feeling left out in the dust, or left out, mind the pun, in the cold. I'm happy to help promote, of course. So if you could, so this is 1993 that this happened. So Pat, since you were actively working in the sheriff's department at that time, what were some of the other cases, for maybe my listeners may not know, in Los Angeles that were happening around? Because it seemed like there was a bevy, LA was a bevy of activity for high profile cases at that time.
Well, one of the highest profile cases for a long time was the Ron and Nicole murders, which happened about a year after Brett's murder. And prior to Brett's murder, we had the LA riots from the Rodney King arrest from LAPD. And I was working on a crime impact team out of South Central Los Angeles at the time. And I was far away from the activities of Hollywood and West Hollywood. So I was oblivious to Brett's murder. I hate to say, but it's a big county and a lot of stuff goes on. And I went to work in the Homicide Bureau after 4 years on a surveillance team. And then I went to the Homicide Bureau in '99, and I worked on several high profile cases, but not as high profile as the Ron and Nicole or the Brett. They were high profile for the little cities that the murders had happened in, little local towns that are in the county.
So you spent a lot of time in South Central. You said so, like Southgate, Compton, those types of areas.
Yes,
Lawndale.
yes, I did.
Got it. Got it. And then JC, were you? So you were already here in Los Angeles? Is that? Are you a native Angelino?
No, I'm actually originally from the Northwest, but I had moved to Los Angeles to go to school, and I worked in a restaurant that stayed open till 5 o'clock in the morning that pretty much everybody came to after the clubs closed. So I would see Brett there almost every day, and we were shared the same circle of friends. He had an older brother, Cliff. I think what was really interesting at that time, like in 1993, there was in Los Angeles alone, there was 2,700 murders. Like it
Wow.
was the most dangerous city in the country. And about 6 months before Brett's murder, there was a nightclub called Black and Blue that was on Sunset, owned by Dolph Lundgren and Frank Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's
Oh
brother.
yeah, yeah.
And they had a doorman named Roman Luisi. And it was in December 1992, and it was just the same month that Dragonfly opened, that two patrons had got kicked out of the club and they had walked across the street to 7-Eleven. They were coming back to their car. Roman Luisi comes running out and shoots them, kills them, saying that he did it in self-defense. He went on trial in 94, got off, self-defense, went back to Boston. In 1995, he is killed along with his father and his cousin and a couple of other people. His dad was Bobby the Blade, and his brother Bobby Jr. was Philly Mob. So they were all mobsters. So we discovered that in our investigation of like, why is a doorman, he was called an enforcer, why is he working a door when he's really like mafioso enforcer? And he got off killing two people, and then he ended up being killed by a rival mafia gang in 95. So we started like uncovering all these bizarre cases around Brett's case that were club related. And we were like, is there a connection, or is it just that it was very dangerous at that time? And if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, bad things can happen to you. Also at that time in 93, June of 1993, Heidi Fleiss, Madam Heidi Fleiss, was arrested. And
That's right.
she had a nightclub called On the Rocks, and her best friend and partner was Victoria Sellers, who happened to be Brett's business partner in Friday Night Riot at the club. They were friends. So we started like kind of connecting the dots along the way, and continued to connect the dots with other high profile crimes, including when Ron and Nicole were murdered. The O.J. Simpson trial in 1995 the defense team tried to connect Brett's unsolved murder, saying whoever killed him killed Ron and Nicole. And to this day, Brett's case has been wrapped up in conspiracy theories, being connected to O.J. Simpson's case. And some people speculate, did he have an affair with Nicole? Was he good friends with Ron? And in reality, the connection is Brett's father was a music manager, and he managed Dionne Warwick's career for 19 years. And the family knew O.J. Simpson from his first marriage because they would go to holiday parties. And O.J. first met Brett when he was 8 years old and taught him how to play pool. So the connection isn't through Nicole and Ron, it's actually through O.J. And the fact that he allowed his defense team to try to connect Brett's case to his wife's case, we found very strange and upsetting. And the family didn't talk about it at the time because the police told them not to say anything, not to talk to the media about Brett's case. And so that's kind of stayed with Brett's case to this day. People think that Brett's murder has something to do with OJ's case.
And as we know, the internet doesn't do anything with conjecture or speculation or conspiracy theories. No. Those don't exist anymore.
I guess they come up with a better story than the real story.
Now you said On the Rocks. Is that the club that's above the Roxy on Sunset?
Yeah. Yeah. So Lou Adler's club, and Victoria Sellers' half brother now runs it, the Roxy and On the Rocks.
Fun fact, I helped Heidi Fleiss move out of that apartment right around the corner years ago. Years ago.
Here's another connection.
I have so many weird connections to all of this just because I was kind of came into Hollywood. I arrived in Hollywood in end of 2002. So I've been in Los Angeles 21 years, about half my life. And it's, I know a lot of people, I know a lot of people, but a lot of things. I played at that club on the Rocks before, with my band at the time. And yeah, I know all those places. I am curious though, one thing totally off topic, but where was this restaurant that you worked at until 5 a.m.? It wasn't
Across the
Swingers,
street from
was it?
Cantor's. It's called Damiano's.
Oh
now
yeah.
it's called Frankie and Johnny's now.
Yes.
Same restaurant, just fancy. Damiano's was a dive, but Frankie
Yes,
and
it
Johnny's
was.
super fancy now. But it's still
Yes.
a pizza place.
Yeah, it was right across the street from Cantor's. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense because I remember moving here and going, why are if you go to New York, everything's open and it's the city never sleeps, right? And I just came to LA, I'd be like, is there any place to get any food at like the
Cantor's.
wee hours of the morning? And yes, of course, Cantor's, absolutely, absolutely. Pat, so there's obviously this time there is just you mentioned the Rodney King beatings and being videotaped. I mean, God, if there were cell phones back then, who knows what would have happened, but or TikTok at least. But there was a lot of corruption that ran in. I mean, Los Angeles has a long history. I mean, look at Bob
Sure.
Chinatown, for
Yeah.
sure. But there was a lot of corruption going on. What was that sort of like? And was there this sort of seediness with the LAPD at that time and speculation around that?
Well, I don't really know about any seedy corruption, but there was a few things that were kind of puzzling. One of them was when Victoria and her bodyguard and boyfriend and another person by the name of Don Gibble was arrested for some robberies. When they were searching the house in Northridge, they found copies of the reports of the robberies that they were involved in, and how they would get copies of those police reports. I can only speculate that it would come from somebody within the police department, maybe a friend, maybe I don't know. It's just speculation, but they had to come from somewhere. Those aren't the types of things, at least in general, that are released to anybody in the public. It's unknown why Brett's case has gone unlooked at for so many years, and hopefully they're looking at it. We've tried to make contact with LAPD, and we've had a couple conferences with them, and they seem helpful, and I don't expect them to be calling me and telling me everything that they're doing, because that's not the way we work. They keep a lot of stuff to the breast, but I'm hoping that they're energized to do more. It's hard to pick up a cold case after so many years, and especially since they've had so many changes because of the defunding. They cut programs in the police departments and in the sheriff's departments, and sometimes things go overlooked because of the lack of personnel. Like, for instance, with the sheriff's department, several of our cold case investigators are retired homicide detectives that are hired back for a certain period of time, or even are just volunteers that will go down to the office and start screening cold cases. And just as an experience, when I was at Sheriff's Homicide, we took over the city of Compton, and the city of Compton had a lot of cold cases, but they weren't necessarily because there was no more information. It's because the city of Compton had so many murders, and they only had a couple of investigators, that a lot of the cases, we did very little work to solve them. They were pretty much solved. They just didn't have the opportunity to put the finishing touches on it. And so there's a lot of stuff going on back then, and as far as the personnel and all that, it's just you do the best you can with what little you have. When I was working Homicide, and we got a fresh case, we would follow that as far as we could, and then once all the leads were gone, we would pick up other cases that we were previously working and follow up on those leads. So we try to do the freshest one first, and then go back. So it's a never-ending job.
It sounds like it. And then, as Jacy had said, 2,700 homicides in 1 year. I mean, I know that there's a lot of homicides in Chicago.
Sure.
And I don't know what that rate is, but I don't think I've ever heard it as that high. But I might be mistaken. But were a lot of those homicides due to gang activity? I mean, obviously the 80s and 90s is the rise of the Crips and the Bloods, and obviously Latino gangs moving in and things of that nature. Is a lot of that related to gang activity, or that's just normal stuff?
No, a lot of that is gang activity, and you have to remember during the riots, which only lasted a few weeks, I believe, there was 54 murders during that time, and that's a lot, and all of those have to be investigated with the same amount of personnel. And if I remember correctly, to date or so, there's approximately 9,000 unsolved murders in Los Angeles County.
And there's Washington Post did a huge kind of investigation research, and right now in the United States there's 250,000 unsolved cases, and part of the challenge is the DNA technology. It's expensive to get DNA tested. Now they're obviously making breakthroughs with DNA and doing the genetic testing and being able to track people like they're doing with Brian Kohberger and the Long Island Killer and all of those different cases. So we're very hopeful. The Cold Case Foundation has recently joined Brett's case investigation. There is still DNA left from the crime scene. If it's tested up to today's standards, we're hoping maybe that might be a possibility to identify potentially new leads or suspects.
Now, you had said at the top of the program that there were a lot of people that were reticent or were fearful of participating in the podcast. But it seems like you have quite a bit of interviews with people, and even just in that little trailer that I listened to, there's a lot of different voices. How eager were people to share not only their remembrances of Brett, but also their sort of speculation into what happened? I mean, given it's 30 years later.
Well, I think it was half and half. There's very close friends of Brett's, like his best friends, one of his business partner, family members that were like, yes, we will definitely talk with you and talk for the podcast. And some of the original Homicide detective. And then there were other people that said, we will talk to you, but it has to be off the record. We'll give you the information that you want. Which really opened some doors for us, same as police sources. Especially, we were talking about 1993, certain police officers from Vice could say, hey, this club was under investigation, or the sober meeting that Brett went to, Sundowners on Sunday, was under investigation. Like, there was a lot of criminal activity going on, and even one had mentioned that perhaps Brett's case wasn't investigated thoroughly at the time because it might have been connected to something else. And he was saying, like, I know of 8 murders that one person did, but because he is a witness in another case, we can't go after him. So they were kind of like explaining how things were going during that period. And I think now, because it's almost 30 years later, and for some of the people, I do know them, or because we share similar friends, they probably gave me more information than they would have given, say, just a regular person. And then it was really digging into the court records and police reports and doing searches on different crimes that took place and trying to identify, is there any connection, especially when it came to nightclubs and promoters. I remember interviewing one promoter, and he was saying, when Brett was murdered, there was 2 other promoters murdered at the same time. but nobody talks about it. And he's like, and I don't understand why. And he gave me the club name, and he said, oh, you should look into that. And then he gave me another person's name. He said, don't put that in the podcast, but you should look at this person. So we started getting information like that, which we continue to pass on to LAPD, the Cold Case Unit, and the Cold Case Foundation to say, hey, you should take a look at this. Are they connected? Every day I will get messages from people either through social media or via my email, saying, hey, I knew Brett. I want to tell you this. And then I will go back and research, or I'll go to Brett's brother, Mark, and say, hey, do you remember this person? And he's like, oh yeah, this person is legit. And then, I'll share it with Pat or, LAPD, depending on who it is. But I think you have to look at it like back then, maybe other people were involved in perhaps criminal activity and they didn't want to, like, maybe they were selling pot or whatever, and they didn't want the police coming down on them, or they didn't want to lose their liquor license. And now the challenge is 30 years later, they're much older, they're married, they have kids, and we have social media. And they're like, well, I'm concerned that somebody from my past might jump out and say I did XYZ in 1994, and I'm going to get canceled or something. So that's another challenge that we've had as well.
And there was also people that we've spoke to that said, just let sleeping dogs lie.
I was going to say, I do not have a sleeping dog right now. She's barking at the door. And I thought I had it turned on where nobody could hear my mic, but apparently they can. So it's so funny you mentioned sundowners. And I'm like, there's so many like things that are so LA. The log cabin.
Yes.
It's just like, if you're in this community long enough, you get to know all the... I just started training at Gold's Gym in Venice. And I remember coming out here like 1999 to visit and going there and seeing like all the movie stars and all these people like working out with like James Caan. It's like all these people I saw like idolizing, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's just funny, like the noir that like carries through that whole place, even the sort of whole vibe. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is. LA's a really big town, but it's also a very small world if you travel in a certain social circle, or you're in the music industry or doing entertainment or whatever. But I must say, like, I'm really thankful for the people that did do the interviews with us. I think we ended up getting probably 15 or 16 interviews, which is the podcast series is very comprehensive. It's a docu-series, so it basically follows the murder of Brett in 1993, but it brings you all the way up to date. And we also share with listeners the different other high-profile crimes that may or may not be connected to Brett's case. So we tell a story, and it's also really up for the listeners. Like, do you think they're connected? Or is it just, it's just LA and stuff like that happens? So it's a pretty, it's a really fascinating case, but Pat he's the detective, so he could probably speak more to that, how it compares to other cases.
Well, there is one thing that I want to emphasize. And if you listen to the podcast, one of the people we interview is Tom Lang. He was the lead detective on the Ron and Nicole murders. And we put our heads together and looked at everything. And contrary to what a lot of people think, there's absolutely no connection between Ron and Nicole's murder and Brett's murder. As a matter of fact, there's, from what I understand, there's no truth to the fact that Ron ever worked with Brett, or that Brett ever dated Nicole, or any connection at all. If anything, if there was any kind of connection, it would have been maybe Ron or Nicole had visited the Dragonfly on their own without any entrance by Brett or knowing Brett or anything like that. And that's been substantiated by numerous people and the police agencies. So that's one rumor that could probably be flushed away. And so there's still other people that we did not have an opportunity to speak with that I think could shed more light on Brett's murder. And depending on where we go with this, I hope that we could continue interviewing other people that might have information. And I hope people come forward. There's people that we tried to contact and they didn't want to talk to us at the time. Some of them didn't think we were being, I guess they didn't think we were they thought we were trying to glamorize or capitalize off of Brett's murder, and that we just looked for entertainment. And that's far from the truth. As far as I'm concerned, I want to solve this case and bring closure to friends and family and unsolve the mystery. And hopefully people that we approached to talk to before that didn't want to talk will listen to the podcast and realize that we're legitimately trying to bring a conclusion to Brett's murder, and that they'll reach out and speak to us.
Yeah, well, hopefully, being platformed with something. I mean, and Case File put this out, correct? And they're a massive podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, it's under
We're so
their,
lucky to have them
umbrella.
sponsor us.
Yeah, it's under their umbrella. So they've promoted it to all their listeners as well. And we're fortunate enough to, like in Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, we're like in the top 10 for true crime. And I think a lot of people that are listening to the podcast, they either love it, or some of them are like, oh, it's too much information, because they're like looking for that 45-minute episode where it's the beginning, middle, and end. And Brett's family, especially Mark, his brother, really wanted Brett's full story to be told. And I guess people don't really realize, if you search Brett's name, it's always connected to O.J. Simpson. And they've said, oh, he was a drug dealer. Oh, he was this. Oh, he was that. And he wasn't. And so it's kind of setting the record straight, and also shining a light on some of these other cases and saying, wait a minute, are these cases connected? And why aren't they being investigated? I think another interesting case is the disappearance of Anthony Fox, which was Johnny Depp's business partner in the Viper Room. And Anthony Fox had sued Johnny Depp and his other business partners in 2001, saying, hey, you're not giving me my share of the profits. And so in December of 2001, it was like 4 days, I think, before he was supposed to go to court, and they expected him to win. He disappeared. He was in Ventura, California. He had a 17-year-old daughter at home. He disappeared 4 days before Christmas. They found his truck 2 weeks later, 400 miles away. Anthony's never been found. And so his daughter, Amanda, when she turned 18, she sued the other business partners, and the court found pervasive fraud and forced the other Viper Room owners to turn over the ownership to Amanda. So she got ownership of the Viper Room, and then she turned around and sold it to an investment group. So to this day, Anthony Fox has never been found. And Ventura police say it's still an active case. But when we started connecting the dots and saying, like, how many nightclub owners and music promoters can die in really strange ways and possibly be connected or not be connected? And is it just, the nightclub business is a dirty, dirty business and things happen? I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot where it goes beyond coincidence, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just for listeners to sort of, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but Chrysalis Music, just so people know, they were like at that time at least, they were probably the largest publishing conglomerate for songwriters and for bands and musicians. I believe they were spawned off of David Geffen's Asylum Music, and I think, I'm not 100% sure.
They're from EMI. Out of
EMI. And then, I think now they've been absorbed by somebody, but in all the buyouts. But yeah, I mean, they were massive, so
Billy Idol, Huey Lewis and the News, like all the top bands that you could possibly think of. Yeah. And they would also do publishing deals with rock artists. And then they would have this deal with Epic Records. Like, for example, Brett brought in Rage Against the Machine and helped them get their demo deal. So they Brett was instrumental in getting Rage signed to Epic. And so he was in charge of rock. And so he was working with Korn, and he was working with the Cult, and he was working with all these amazing artists. And Chrysalis Music also gave a lot of hip hop artists at that time their first big break. So it was a very powerful music label, very well respected. And as we dug into Brett's, personal life, when he was found, there were no drugs in his system. They couldn't find anything negative about him. It wasn't like, oh, he was dealing drugs or something, criminal was going on. He was very well respected. And people were like, well, the one thing that we went back to is like, well, what happened in Brett's life at that time? He became a business partner in Dragonfly in December 1992, and 6 months later, he was murdered. So he just started getting in. He had been a music promoter doing like underground clubs, which were one-offs. And then he became a partner in this nightclub. And it was like, did he see something he shouldn't have? Did they want him to, not his business partners, but did someone else in the club scene want him to do something that he didn't agree to? It was really interesting talking to the other detectives from LA County sheriffs to LAPD to working different cases, and even talking with Tom Lang. And Tom Lang was saying like, oh, it sounded like a message killing to him, not to Brett. Like Brett was collateral damage, and perhaps it was a message to someone else that Brett worked with.
Sure.
So
that's interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Pat?
Oh yeah, I agree. I think that Brett was either aware of something that was going on that he wasn't supposed to know, and maybe he was trying to clean it up. I know that from what we've learned, Brett's the type of guy that if there was illegal activity going through the Dragonfly, that he would not allow it. And that could piss people off, especially if it's interfering with their way of making some money. The most of the narcotics back then and still are controlled by the Mexican mafia, who sells to other organized crime like the Russian mafia and the ones who are very active in the West Hollywood area. And so there's big money to be made, and I know that Jacy was told by somebody in the music business that if you start interfering with profits to be made, that you'll be taken care of. And so we think maybe they went to go tell Brett to knock it off, to go along with the flow, and he wouldn't agree to it, or he was gonna go to the police. It was something happened, and I don't think it had to do with the underground stuff, even though he was getting out of that, and that might have ruffled some feathers because he was a source of money for several people, and when something like that happens, other people that were working at the Dragonfly, there was a doorman who fled and went to, I don't know, Europe somewhere or something. I know that Steve Edelson wanted to sell his shares of the Dragonfly and get out of it. And he was too upset with Brett's murder. And so something happened, or he knew something, and it was a message to other people that if you don't go along with the program, or if you interfere, the same thing can happen to you. Like we always see in some of the most basic movies that they put out in the market nowadays, is stuff like that.
Absolutely. So who are some of your favorite characters in this? And there was a couple of comments here saying like how well done they've been listening to the show, and how well done it is, and how comprehensive it is. Who are some of your favorite characters along the way in this story, and this unraveling of the case, and also bringing up these other cases?
For me, I've really enjoyed working with Mark, Brett's brother, for the last 4 years on the case. He's very funny. He's a musician. But the whole Cantor family, they have such a great personality. I love his mom. And even through their grief and everything that's happened, they've still maintained a positive attitude and, want to share positive stories as well, not just the sad part of what happened. I think Rose McGowan, she is a force to be reckoned with. She was dating Brett at the time of his murder. And then they had just started dating. And then after Brett was murdered, his brother Cliff and Mark took over the percentage that Brett owned, which was only 10%. But then Mark became a bartender and Cliff became kind of a club owner. And then he bought out Steve Edelson. So he owned a third of the business. And then Rose ended up dating Cliff for almost a couple of years. So following her, through her career and then what happened with Harvey Weinstein, and Rose is directly responsible for Brett's case getting relooked at in 2006 when Chief Bratton took over. Chief Bratton was a neighbor of hers, and she went to him and said, "Hey, this is a former boyfriend of mine. It's a cold case. Can you please look at it?" And then they took it back to Detective Rick Jackson, and I guess they had moved buildings, and they had lost Brett's murder book and all the crime scene box. And so it took 3 months for them to find it, and they found it. So they retested all the DNA in 2006, and they did get a DNA hit, but it was someone that was like a housekeeper at the house, so they had a reason to be there. But Rose was responsible for getting Brett's case looked at again, saving all the evidence, and has continued to be, a victim's right advocate for many people. And she's just been so lovely. And I think probably Brett's ex-girlfriend, Tony, she gave us a lot of interesting information. She's very interesting. And David, his business partner, David, who owns Dragonfly to this day.
I've been to Dragonfly. I was there in the early 2000s.
See, there you go. That's when Cliff was there. So Cliff
and Viper Room and what was it? There's the whiskey a go-go, and then there's the whiskey right down. What was that? It's a drive right there by the hotel or underneath the hotel, like the OG whiskey, and then there's the Roxy, and then Rainbow Room. All that. Mirabelle's was way back in the day too.
Yep. Yeah.
Right there on the corner by Holloway. Oh.
Yeah, you're thinking of Chateau Marmont, the whiskey bar.
No. Oh, wait, is the whiskey in Chateau Marmont?
Well, the whiskey bar was in the Chateau Marmont.
Oh, I guess then I didn't realize that. No, I was thinking of that offshoot right down Sunset, right off of Sunset into West Hollywood. I can't remember the name of the street, but there where the Hustler store is and all that. Yeah. I thought it was down there. No, in Chateau, of course, the Chateau Marmont. This.
I had the pleasure of not knowing any of that stuff. I was totally on the east side, more inland, and so when Jacy started talking to me about all these things, I didn't even know who Rage Against the Machine was. Sorry.
Hold on, Pat. I gotta get him off here. You're done. How could you, Zach De La Rocha?
I did no corn.
Okay, well, all right, you're forgiven a little bit.
I don't know bands so much as I know the songs. So when she started telling me some of the songs and stuff, then okay, well, I didn't know that they were called the Rage Against the Machine. But I didn't know Damiano's. I knew Cantor's because I've been there before. I knew the Grove and stuff like that from visiting every once in a while. I knew some of the places in West Hollywood because I would work up some of the murders down there, and a lot of suicides down in West Hollywood that I had to handle. And so I was a little bit familiar with it, but not as far as partying or anything like that there.
Well, I only heard about these parties. I live vicariously. I don't know anything about this.
And as far as favorite people that we've had the opportunities to interview, pretty much everybody that Sean said. And me being a cop, I guess I had a problem with people that didn't want to talk. I'm like, what? This is 30 years ago. Come on now. If you don't want to give us information on the record, talk to us off the record. Nobody's going to go after you right now. I'm not going to tell anybody that you're giving us information. But you know what? Just talk to us and let us know some stuff. And Jacy knows how I felt about some of the people that were shunned by, but that's my own private opinion.
I think Tom Lang was really interesting for Pat. So Tom
Yes, he
Lang,
was.
obviously legendary homicide detective.
Yes.
He worked the Wonderland murders, like every major crime that you can think of in LA. Tom Lang was like the lead detective. So that was pretty
I could talk to him for days.
pretty epic that he agreed to do an interview and gave us an inside look at what was going on at the O.J. Simpson trial when they tried to get Brett's case dragged into court. And then Detective Jackson gave us the inside view on what was going on. And then for him to give his opinion on what he thought might have happened to Brett, I thought was very insightful. And, to have all these amazing homicide detectives to take a look at Brett's case or to even hear his story. And they obviously know so much that we don't know. And to share their insights or be like, oh, they would point us in a direction going like, hey, you need to look at this other case. This may be a connection. Talking to Brett's friends, pointing us in different directions of saying, don't tell them I told you this, but go look here. And then we would find something new.
Pat, you mentioned something interesting that I know I'm curious about, and I think maybe my audience would be as well. When you're talking to people, you said, look, I'm not going to go and open up a case against you. And that, like, how, I think a lot of people are reticent to come forward when they know information because they have these skeletons in the closet. Like, oh yeah, I was there at the party because I was the guy that brought the blow, or whatever it is, right? So they don't want to incriminate themselves. And how realistic? Like, first of all, you understand that they're going to be prevaricative and whatnot, but how realistic is that somebody who comes forward with evidence in something like this is then charged with a crime from 30 years ago?
Absolutely nothing. They have this thing called statute of limitations, and with murder, there is no statute of limitation. The case you could be arrested and prosecuted for the case if you were 18 years old and you committed a murder, and they pick you up, and when you're 98 years old, they could prosecute you and send you to prison for the last few days of your life.
Whitey Bulger was literally down the street from me here in Santa Monica.
See?
Literally.
And but for somebody to, if they were trafficking drugs, if they were using drugs, if they were facilitating crimes back then, the statute of limitations ran out years ago on all of that stuff. Now, if they said, hey, well, I don't want to come forward because I did a murder. Well, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't come forward. That would be my advice. Unless you did Brett's murder, then let us know so that we could, give you some closure as well. Because that's a hard thing to live with for so many years, knowing that it's only a matter of time before they come knocking on your door. There was an incident where there was 2 El Segundo police officers killed many years ago, and I think it was either in the 50s or the 60s. And our department started investigating it probably in the early 2000s. And one day they went and knocked on a door in another state, and the old man answered. And first thing out of his mouth was, I was wondering when you guys would show up. And, you've been living all those years like that. And that's a great statement, right? No Miranda violation there, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
But I think he was probably relieved, that he lived his life, and now, hey, it's time. They got me, and it's time for me to go pay for what I did. And so hopefully the people that were involved do that and come forward. And even if they weren't the ones that did the killing, even if they were there, or even if they knew about it or talked about it or anything. And there's another thing that people don't realize. Unless you are actually a recipient witness to the crime, if you know about it and you said, hey, I know about it, I heard that it was Joe Schmo who was involved in the murder, but I don't want to be involved. That person doesn't have to be involved. We don't have to, law enforcement agencies don't have to say where that information came from. All it is it's a pointer. It's pointing in the direction of something. And then the investigator has to find the evidence to substantiate why that person may be involved. And if they're not, then it's great to clear people too, just as much. So just because you know something doesn't necessarily mean you have to be, go to court or testify or anything. We get that. I got that all the time. I would tell people, hey, you don't have to get involved. I don't even want to know your name or anything like that. But if you know who did this, let me know. And they'd say, well, why don't you look into so-and-so? And then we look into so-and-so and we put a case together and figure out this person does not have any alibi or anything like that. When you investigate murders, what you're basically trying to do is prove that the suspect did not do the crime. And if you can't prove the suspect did not do the crime, then they probably did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also interesting, we all pay the piper at some point.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned El Segundo. That's a crazy place. I lost my wallet there years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Mover Nation, if you can tell me what that song that is from and what band, bonus points to you.
What, I lost my wallet in El Segundo?
Left my wallet in El Segundo. Do you know who that was, Pat?
I know I left my heart in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But,
well, hey, rest in peace. Rest in peace, Tony
you.
Bennett. Rest in peace, Tony Bennett.
Yes.
Great reference. I salute that. Guys, thank you so much. This was so wonderful to have you on the program. What is the next steps with your podcast? Where can everyone find you guys? Where can they find the podcast? Let's talk about that.
Dragonfly Podcast is available for streaming now on Apple, Spotify, all your favorite streaming platforms. You can also go to dragonflypodcast.com. You can go to casefilepresents.com. We do have clips on our own YouTube channel for Brett's channel. If people just want to listen to clips from the podcast at Dragonfly Podcast on YouTube. And the Cold Case Foundation has now joined the investigation. And maybe, Pat, you can kind of share what happens next as far as that's concerned.
Well, the Cold Case Foundation is a group of retired law enforcement officers, which is usually FBI, maybe homicide detectives from different states, different agencies. They might be retired people from the Department of Justice, either state or federal. And what they do is they act as counselors. They'll counsel other agencies on their cases, and they'll consult and they'll look into the evidence and everything and come up with maybe different ideas to look into. And so they don't necessarily work with Jacy and I. They are the type that would work with Los Angeles Police Department. And so if they wanted to share information with us, they would only do so if LAPD said, yeah, go ahead and share the information. But a lot of times we might be left out of everything and just find out when you do type of thing, that's basically the way they work. It's out of our hands. They're not working with us on the podcast. They would be working with LAPD on the investigation.
Well, it's so great and so serendipitous that they've come on to join to help you, bring some closure to this case and bring some closure to the family. I've had Shirley McCollum on this program before, and she's part of the Cold Case Foundation. It's a really great organization. So all the best with that. I will have links to all of Jacy and Pat's links for the podcast, links to the YouTube channel where you can get clips, like I played one earlier. And I just want to say thank you guys so much, Jacy, Pat. Thank you guys so much for coming on the program. It was really wonderful to have you guys, and I'm maybe we can have you back on and we can talk about this as you get more details, because hopefully the podcast has only been out for since July 18th, so not even 2 weeks.
Yeah, and if I may add real quick, for anybody that hasn't listened to the podcast and is watching this broadcast right now, if you have any information regarding Brett Cantor, you could always contact Jacy or I on the podcast site. They'll give you some emails. Also, if you want to be anonymous, you could contact the Crime Stoppers. They have an 800 number. I think it's 800 Crime Stoppers or something to that effect. But they're easy to contact also.
And my last thing is it's the 30-year anniversary of Brett's death on Sunday. So if anyone would like or share the podcast, that would be we would so appreciate it. Not only for Brett's family or for anyone else that's lost someone that they loved. You know, all these stories deserve to be remembered. And we just so appreciate you inviting us to be on your show and being able to talk a little bit about Brett. And thank you so much from my heart.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Absolutely.
And Collier, you said to look at the case of the poor lady that was stabbed so many times and it was a suicide.
Yes. Ellen Greenberg. Is that who you're talking about?
Greenberg,
in
yes,
Philadelphia.
Ellen Greenberg. That was incredible. I could not believe it, that I was actually reading what I was reading. It's incredible. And from what I understand, still nothing's been done. Her boyfriend at the time, he's married and living in New York or something. That's crazy.
It is really unfortunate, but that's one of the things is that when we do these things so we can shine light into the darkness and expose what's going on, and the more that we have conversations about this, like civilized, organized, coherent, cogent analysis and conversations, it really helps bring that narrative to the forefront in people's minds and think about it. That was my passion for a long time, why I got into doing the podcast, but before that, why I got into making my film.
Sure.
Was to talk about the consequences of violence and the impacts that they have on not only the victims, but society as a whole, the ancillary victims communities. And that became sort of my soapbox, if you will, in a lot of ways, or just at least, my sort of mission that's unfolded here in all different ways through this podcast and through this YouTube channel. So, I'm happy to promote all of this. And like I said, we will have links to all of this in the show notes of today's episode, wherever you guys are listening. If you're watching here on YouTube, if you're listening wherever you get your favorite podcast, you should check it out. It is called Dragonfly, Brett Cantor Murder Mystery or Murder Story, I believe, right?
Murder Mystery. That's what I have, but I was like, is it mystery? Dragonfly, Brett Cantor Murder Mystery. Check it out wherever you get your favorite podcasts from. My guests today are Jacy Nova and Pat Tapia. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the program. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
And I want to say thank you to all of my channel members, channel subscribers, Patreon supporters. Look, this how you guys help this program is how I can be able to get amazing guests like I just had and be able to have them share their story, because as you can see, podcasting and sharing these stories really does impact change and really does share the stories of the people that are often forgotten by the headlines, or their cases are not solved. And these families and the victims and members of the community are still looking for justice and are still looking for some sort of closure. So your support goes to help a long way, whether it's just sharing this program, liking, subscribing, ringing the bell, writing a great review, checking out their show, Dragonfly. All of that goes a long way to help get justice for Brett and also to spread the message that I do on this program. On that note, I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Trauma. Thanks, y'all.
This podcast is made possible by support from listeners just like you. For exclusive content around this podcast, please consider supporting me via Patreon by going to collierlandry.com/support. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to see video episodes of this podcast, please check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/collierlandry. You can find links to additional resources in the show notes of today's episode. This podcast is a production of Don't Touch My Radio. Copyright Collier Landry.